After part 1 covered the current generation and PC of Diablo 4, here we delve a little deeper with the last generation versions and that power PC in your hands of the Steam Deck. Can it push past those last generation consoles? So let's start with the basics. What has been cut from the current generation to run on the last generation? Or indeed, what was added from the last generation for the current? Let's take those in order. Probably the biggest, or arguably the smallest in this case, is resolution. Starting from the Xbox One X going down to the Xbox One S, or the Steam Deck, depending on your choices, then resolution and AA solutions don't appear to be consistent. Like the current generation, they all do appear to be using FSR2 for their solutions, but the Xbox One and the Xbox One X appear to have some issues in the API, where you can get some instability on edges and alpha effects, as you see here zoomed in and slowed down. These do not match the Steam Deck and both PlayStation consoles, which also appear to be using a reconstruction technique, which is most likely going to be FSR2, as that is the base solution in all AMD cards, and DLSS2 is used for all Nvidia cards. This difference in the AA solution can cause some issues, mostly in the real-time cinematics, but occasionally in the game, but it's not prevalent. Starting at the top, the Xbox One X and Pro come in with a matching level of output to the Series S, offering 2560 by 1440, again via that reconstruction technique, be FSR2 or something other. It does look very similar to FSR2 on the current gen, aside those small issues as mentioned, but the Xbox One and X either have a temporal buffer issue or something is going on with their solution that causes these flickering elements as noticed. Overall, high contrast edges and foliage are most affected, but generally this leaves the Xbox One X with a slightly inferior image quality compared to the Series S, and even the Pro, which has a more stable image even from that same 847p output. Again, with these reconstruction techniques, the higher the base resolution, the better the image quality is, up to a point at least. So the next cutback is the Xbox One X does have some superior image quality options over the Pro. Shadow resolution and quality is certainly one rung higher, which affects both the real-time cinematics and in-game, and in fact has the same resolution cascade and shadow quality as the Xbox Series S, which is one rung lower than the PS5 and Xbox One X, which are closest to the best on PC. The Xbox One and the PS4 also have a slight difference. Again, it might be resolution related, but you're certainly getting slightly sharper and better shadows on the PS4 over the Xbox One, but it isn't a significant improvement overall. Finally, the Xbox One X shares the same ambient occlusion and fur setting as the Series S. This is one rung higher than both the Pro, the PS4 and even the Xbox One, which are closest to low or even below low compared to the PC settings. This can affect some image quality overall in the title, and it can be a significant difference going from the PlayStation 5 to the Xbox One, as you see here. But overall, expect this to be a subtle shift that you will notice in these side-by-side comparisons, but it won't stand out drastically during gameplay. In terms of the base consoles, and the PlayStation 4 comes in with a base resolution of 1280 by 720, reconstructed back using FSR2 to 1080p. Whereas the Xbox One comes in with approximately 23% reduction on that of 1129 by 635, again reconstructed back using FSR2 to 1080p. This is a subtle reduction to the image quality and can be the cause for some of the differences I've mentioned in shadow resolution and other alpha effects. But texture details and assets are significantly reduced on the last generation machines and even the Steam Deck due to the much lower levels of VRAM and system RAM available on those machines. In addition to this, we see other reductions in geometric detail. Fundamentally, the game heavily relies on a tessellation level and higher levels of LOD across objects and density in the world, and as you see here in dungeons and outdoor sections, you get reductions on those areas significantly when you go from both the Xbox One right up to the Xbox One X, which all use that lower level of geometry and LOD. This can reduce details across the world, both indoors and out, and in addition to this, the ambient occlusion and foliage reduction also means you get less grass and shadow density across certain areas in the title, and this can make the biggest difference in image quality between last generation and current generation, certainly over that resolution delta, which is surprisingly small considering the difference in power between the two machines. But the biggest difference really comes down to performance, where one targets 60 FPS, all others target 30. So, starting with the base consoles and the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, they are similar in terms of performance, and in most smaller sections of combat, internal dungeons, cellars, all of those can target 30 FPS quite well. But you will get judders and stutters in two key areas. One is those real-time cinematics, which can be memory bound often, both on the PS4 and Xbox One. As it uses a double buffered frame rate, you can see this dropping down to fixed points of 20 FPS. Surprisingly, the PlayStation 4 can actually run worse in these GPU heavy sections. In addition to this, traversing the world, working through the game itself, achieving story missions, and the online connectivity can cause severe judder and stutter on both consoles equally, and this is tied to both the memory management issues I mentioned on the current generation console, and in these denser areas of coffee shad, the CPU impact, because it can become single thread bound at certain points, but also the network connectivity. Constantly syncing your account with the online world with the servers can also cause longer pauses and stutters, which affect these older consoles more. You can see these longer pauses here causing huge stutters of a second or more even on the Xbox One, but it seems to affect the PS4 and the Pro more, which might be related to the API and network connectivity. I've tried turning on and off cross-platform play, but it doesn't appear to improve the issue. Overall, do expect some severe judders and stutters in both the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One consoles, but you can get longer issues on the PS4, as you see here. Syncing to servers, just opening doors can cause 17 to 20 second delays, and then you're literally whipped back into place where the online syncing server thought you were at the time. This can cause old-fashioned rubber banding across all consoles. Again, PlayStation is affected the most, and this can affect your gameplay throughout. Because the game is locked to an online server connection even in single player, this can't be mitigated, and therefore it means that the older generation consoles with their slower CPUs, memory bandwidth, hard drives, and online network connectivity can affect these consoles far more than it does in the current generation and PC market. It does perform significantly better than the previous Diablo 3 on its PS3 and Xbox 360 consoles, with tearing and performance issues throughout, but do expect judder and stutter in real-time cinematics, and certainly in the online connected world, which can affect performance on these older generation consoles due to their weaker and far older hardware underneath. So moving into the more powerful consoles in the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X, then things are significantly better. One of those areas is improved memory speeds, most likely, the improved CPU speed, and therefore the faster processing of network data to results on screen. Yes, they can still drop frames in both the real-time cinematics and in gameplay, and you'll still get rubber banding and some judders and longer pauses when the game can stutter and judder through heavier areas such as Coffee Shad and other cities later on in the title. But fundamentally, you're getting a much better experience and a much closer lock to that 30 FPS target they all achieve, or at least they all aim for. The Pro and the Xbox One X again share similarities in performance, with the Xbox One X unsurprisingly being better, but I did note some reductions in alpha effects on the Xbox One X which aren't present on the PS4, and therefore it's pushing slightly higher bandwidth levels. But I have counted approximately 10 updates across all consoles and PC since the game launched, and they are patching and updating some of the issues I mentioned in my current generation review. Notably, the reduction or removal of some of those very intensive shadow casting dynamic light sources, which could randomly be on or off based on the PS5 having worse settings than the Xbox One and vice versa, but they seem to have tidied these up now, and it is an optimization level trying to improve performance. And now you're seeing lights reduced on PS4 and PS4 Pro, which used to be present, and the same on the Xbox One X and Xbox One. This is likely optimization work, which the game appeared to still be in that stage, and some may say they've been overzealous both from the PlayStation 5 down in terms of their resolution and settings, but that is the better option for a stable and more consistent presentation, rather than trying to hand-tune on a hardware by hardware basis, and reinforces why dynamic resolution systems are so good. Likely we'll see more patches for the foreseeable future, certainly with an online-based title like this, and I do expect potentially unlocked frame rates to those real-time cinematics as we saw on the PC post-release. Ultimately, the Xbox One X is the better of the last generation versions, down to the fact it has the higher level of graphical settings and the more consistent and stable performance. The Pro is a close second and can improve on image quality slightly as mentioned, but overall network connectivity issues probably present the biggest issues between the platforms, and here the Xbox is the better platform. Although there could be another solution closer to hand. Now, the Steam Deck offers a great example of the headroom offered on the current generation consoles, but also the reason why some of the choices have been made across all generations. First is the option of a native T88 output or a reconstructed output via FSR2. As here we can see a slightly better image quality using FSR2 output than the native 900p output, largely due to the adaptive sharpening pass in FSR2. But note that the GPU power use is almost half that of the native choice at 30 FPS with superior image quality, making it a win-win. More importantly though, by reconstructing back to 720p from a 480p base, we can target and often achieve a 60 FPS frame rate, double that of all the last generation consoles and matching the current gen, albeit with a reduced image quality. The benefits do not end here though. In addition to double the frame time, we can also close the gap to the settings between the generations, having superior ambient occlusion, shadows, and the medium setting of geometry and foliage over the Xbox One, PS4, and much closer to the Series S, which also includes SSR reflections in the worlds, dynamic puddles, and large bodies of water throughout. In fact, from a visual and options perspective, the Steam Deck is significantly better than all last generation consoles, aside one area which is hard to ignore: textures and materials. Simply put, due to the lower bandwidth at 88GB even compared to the PlayStation 4, and only 6GB of VRAM shared across its total 16GB of LPDDR5 RAM, we can see delays on texture loading to the highest MIPS, as you see on screen. It has reduced textures over the current generation, 80GB versus 48GB installs. You can download the high resolution pack to match this, but it's a waste on this machine as it doesn't have sufficient VRAM to utilize these anyway. And many engines allocate higher MIPS based on the output resolution, with the Steam Deck topping out at 1440p using FSR2 performance at best. So it is an option, and we have the choice of performance versus pixels, which is the perfect balance. Almost. Before we dive into performance on the Steam Deck, we must caveat that this isn't a Steam Deck verified title and isn't available on the Steam application. This is running under a higher level of Wine or Proton GE, using that Linux-based Steam OS to emulate a Windows app via abstraction. Not for this video, but a Steam verified and updated version would run significantly better both in GPU, CPU and memory allocation than what we're seeing in this video, which is effectively a high level of abstraction. So with all that said, the performance at 60 FPS unsurprisingly can be heavily bound by CPU impact. The title, just like it is on current generation and PC, can become single thread bound in the heavier cities, which is worse here on the Steam Deck, targeting 60 FPS. But any decent desktop CPU of the last 5 to 6 years or so will still run this title way above 60 FPS with no issues, as I covered in the previous video on my Zen 2700, which can hit 120 FPS without any issues, even in the denser cities, although that's the only place where it can become CPU limited. Which means playing the game, you will get lots of stutters and judders, as you see here, and it's a combination of memory bound issues, streaming data in, and CPU limitations, specifically around 1 to 2 threads. You can see it on the overlay graph on the left hand side. This means you will get performance hiccups at 60 FPS, and it can then judder up to 600 milliseconds, which is related to the online connectivity service sync and all the other areas from CPU memory I've just covered on the last generation consoles. This means that although the Steam Deck can't offer a locked 60 FPS, it can get close to around 50 FPS quite evenly, meaning 40 FPS capped would offer a pretty smooth and better performing title than the last generation consoles. But the other option the Steam Deck offers is the ability to change the resolution from this 720p reconstructed output for using FSR2 to a reconstructed 1440p output with higher settings than the last generation consoles at 30 FPS. This will present image quality much closer to what the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X and even the Series S offer, albeit at sub 30 FPS at certain points during those real-time cinematics, and the caveat of inconsistent performance in those denser cities, which either drop frames or show inconsistent frame pacing, which can feel equally as bad. Meaning it isn't a locked 30 or a locked 60, but you can get somewhere in between. But it also has one extra trump card, bringing it much closer to the current generation: its SSD and much faster CPU, meaning loading times, fast travel, and even traveling in and out of dungeons is almost instantaneous compared to last generation, and significantly faster than any of the last generation consoles, even with an SSD installed. As you see here, compared to the current generation's best in the Series X and last generation, it's around 4 seconds slower than the Series X and around 16 seconds faster than the Xbox One. A significant improvement, and this is the same for fast travel, which is much faster than the last generation, and going in and out of dungeons and tombs can all be significantly faster to almost instantaneous, where there are small loading sections on the last generation consoles. And in fact, the Series X is significantly faster, as is the PlayStation 5 and Series S, being able to travel to 3 separate locations in the same time as the Xbox One can travel to Kovishad, showing you how fast and impactful the SSD and CPUs are on these machines with this newer title. And this means the Steam Deck comes closest to matching those consoles, but image quality, texture details are the biggest sacrifices, and even though a locked 60 FPS is not possible, but it does demonstrate that should this game get optimized and verified for Steam Deck, it could perform significantly better than even the Xbox One X, and that is quite an appetizing idea.
Let it burst forth.
To wrap up, the last generation versions are really the true versions of Diablo 4. Being in development long before the PlayStation 5 and Series X was out in the wild, and certainly with developers, they would have built this around the hardware specifications of the last generation. And that means you get a great performing title, but it is improved and enhanced because it is a cross-generation title on the current generation consoles, rather than being significantly different. And this gives the Steam Deck an advantage in its performance and outputs, which we see in the results. And it is still an excellent way to play it, even if it's not verified by Valve. Anyway, that's it for another deep dive into hell, performance, pixels, and all things graphics related. Remember, if you like what we do here on IGN Performance Reviews, then keep it IGN, and we'll catch you in the next one.
He feared Lilith might seek you out. He was right.
Yes. She put me here.